Welcome back to the Numis Explorer, the channel where hidden treasures, rare coins, fascinating minting mistakes, and incredible possibilities in American currency come to life, and today we are taking a closer look at a 1980 quarter dollar that has become the center of an extraordinary numismatic story, with an astonishing claimed value of up to $375 million in the most extreme hypothetical scenario. Now, before you rush to your coin jar expecting every 1980 quarter to be worth a fortune, remember that ordinary examples are generally common, and a spectacular value would require an exceptionally rare, authenticated mint error, extraordinary condition, unusual provenance, or some combination of factors that makes the coin genuinely important to collectors. The 1980 Washington quarter was struck at the Denver Mint and carries the familiar Washington portrait on the obverse and the eagle design on the reverse, but what makes a particular example potentially fascinating is not simply the date or mint mark, it is what happened to that individual coin during the complicated manufacturing process. Coins pass through multiple stages involving planchets, dies, striking pressure, alignment, feeding mechanisms, and quality control procedures, and mistakes can occasionally create unusual pieces that escape normal inspection. One possibility collectors watch for is an off-center strike, where the blank planchet is not positioned correctly when the dies come together, leaving part of the design missing and producing an obvious blank area around the rim. The farther off-center the strike is while still retaining enough identifying detail, the more dramatic the error can become, although rarity, visual appeal, authentication, and condition all matter when determining market interest. Another possibility is a broad strike, which can occur when a coin is struck without the normal retaining collar properly surrounding the planchet, allowing the metal to spread outward and creating an unusually wide appearance. A dramatic broad strike can be immediately noticeable because the coin may appear larger or flatter around the edges than a normal quarter. There are also double die possibilities, although genuine double dies must be carefully distinguished from ordinary machine doubling, die deterioration, strike characteristics, or damage that happened after the coin left the mint. If a genuine double die were discovered on a 1980 quarter and authenticated by a respected grading service, collectors could take a serious interest, especially if the doubling appeared clearly on important lettering, numbers, or design elements. Another fascinating category involves die clashes, which happen when opposing dies come together without a planchet between them, potentially transferring portions of one design onto the other die and later creating unexpected design remnants on struck coins. A genuine and dramatic clash error can make a coin particularly interesting because it provides evidence of an unusual event inside the minting process. There are also struck-through errors, where a foreign object or piece of material comes between the die and planchet during striking, leaving an unusual depression, missing detail, or distorted portion of the design. Some struck-through errors can be subtle, while others are dramatic enough to immediately capture attention. Another possibility is a wrong planchet error, where a quarter design is accidentally struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or an incorrect composition. Such errors can be extremely fascinating because the coin's weight, diameter, metal composition, edge characteristics, and appearance may differ from what is expected for a normal 1980 quarter. However, this is precisely why professional authentication is so important, because color changes, unusual weight, damaged edges, plating issues, environmental exposure, or altered coins can sometimes look strange without being genuine mint errors. A coin that appears unusual should never automatically be assumed to be $1 million or multimillion-dollar discovery. The biggest stories in numismatics usually involve a combination of genuine rarity, unmistakable error characteristics, excellent preservation, strong documentation, and competition among collectors. Condition can also dramatically influence desirability. A 1980 quarter preserved with sharp details, minimal marks, strong luster, and excellent surfaces may attract considerably more attention than a heavily circulated example, especially if the coin also possesses a certified major error. Collectors may examine Washington's portrait, the lettering, the date, the mint mark, the rim, the edge, the reverse design, and the overall strike to determine whether anything appears genuinely abnormal. They may also weigh the coin and compare its measurements with known specifications. If something seems suspicious, professional grading and authentication become essential. A legitimate certification from a major third-party grading service can provide far more confidence than an online photograph or an unsupported claim. This is especially important when extraordinary values are being discussed, because a headline saying that a coin is worth $375 million does not mean every example of that date and mint mark has anything remotely close to that value. In reality, an enormous figure would represent an extraordinary hypothetical ceiling rather than a normal market price, and collectors should always distinguish between sensational claims and documented auction records. Still, the possibility of discovering a dramatic error is one of the reasons coin collecting remains so exciting. Imagine finding a 1980 quarter in an old collection, inherited group of coins, bankroll, estate lot, or forgotten jar and noticing that something about its shape, strike, lettering, weight, or metal appearance seems completely different from an ordinary quarter. Instead of spending it immediately, the smart approach is to preserve it carefully, avoid cleaning or polishing it, record where it came from if known, compare it with trusted references, and seek professional evaluation. Cleaning a potentially rare coin can permanently damage its surfaces and may reduce collector interest, while scratches, drilling, filing, chemical treatment, or other alterations can make authentication much more difficult. Even if your coin turns out not to be the legendary rarity you hoped for, the investigation itself can teach you something about minting errors and the history of American coinage. The 1980 quarter is therefore an excellent reminder that value is not created simply by a number printed in a video title. True numismatic value comes from rarity, authenticity, condition, demand, historical significance, and evidence. If an extraordinary 1980 quarter with a major, previously unknown mint error were ever authenticated and offered in a major auction, intense collector competition could potentially push its value far beyond ordinary expectations, depending on the exact error and circumstances. That is where the incredible $375 million possibility enters the story, not as a guaranteed price for a normal quarter, but as an extreme hypothetical scenario illustrating how valuable a genuinely unique and historically important error could become if the right collectors competed for it. So before you dismiss an old quarter as just another piece of pocket change, take a closer look. Check the date, inspect the mint mark, study the rim, examine the lettering, compare the strike on both sides, and pay attention to anything that appears genuinely unusual. Look for major off-center strikes, broad strikes, dramatic die abnormalities, genuine double details, struck-through characteristics, die clashes, wrong planchet possibilities, and other unusual manufacturing features, but always remember that professional authentication is the key to separating a true mint error from ordinary wear, damage, or alteration. The next unbelievable discovery could be sitting unnoticed in an old coin album, a family collection, a forgotten jar, or even loose change, and that uncertainty is what keeps treasure hunters and collectors searching. If you have a 1980 quarter, do not automatically assume it is worth millions, but do not ignore it either if you notice something genuinely unusual. Study it carefully, protect it, and get an expert opinion before making any decision. Numismatics is filled with surprises, and sometimes a tiny mistake made decades ago at a mint can become the reason a coin captures worldwide attention. Thank you for joining the Numis Explorer, and if you enjoy discovering rare American coins, mysterious mint errors, valuable pocket change, and the incredible stories hidden inside ordinary-looking currency, make sure you stay connected with the channel, subscribe for more fascinating coin discoveries, and share this video with another collector who loves searching for hidden treasures. Keep checking your coins, keep learning the difference between real errors and ordinary damage, and most importantly, never stop exploring, because the next coin you examine might have a story far more interesting than its face value suggests. Next, 1993 quarter dollar coin. Today we are taking a fascinating look at the 1993 Washington quarter dollar and the incredible possibility of an example becoming an extremely valuable numismatic discovery, with a sensational hypothetical value reaching as high as $370 million if an extraordinarily rare, authenticated, one-of-a-kind combination of errors, exceptional condition, historical importance, and intense collector competition were ever established. Before getting excited and assuming every 1993 quarter is worth a fortune, it is important to understand that most 1993 P-quarters are ordinary coins with ordinary values, and a figure as enormous as $370 million should be treated as an extreme hypothetical claim rather than a normal market price or a guaranteed valuation. What makes this coin fascinating is the possibility that an individual example could have escaped the Philadelphia Mint with a dramatic manufacturing mistake, creating a piece that is substantially different from the millions of normal quarters produced during the era. The 1993 P quarter carries the familiar Washington design, and the P Mint mark indicates production at the Philadelphia Mint, but the real excitement begins when collectors discover something unusual about the way an individual coin was struck. Coin production is a highly controlled process, yet mistakes can happen involving planchets, dies, striking pressure, alignment, feeding mechanisms, collars, and other parts of the minting process, and when a significant error survives quality control, the resulting coin can become highly desirable to collectors. One of the first possibilities collectors might investigate is an off-center strike, which occurs when the planchet is not correctly positioned between the dies at the moment of striking. A dramatic off-center strike can leave part of the design missing and produce a large blank area along one side of the coin, creating an immediately recognizable appearance. The degree of off-centering, the amount of the date and mint mark remaining visible, the overall condition, and the authenticity of the error can all influence collector interest. Another possibility is a broad strike, where the collar does not properly contain the planchet during striking, allowing the metal to spread outward beyond its normal shape. A genuine broad strike can make a quarter look wider or flatter than expected, and when combined with other unusual characteristics, it can become a fascinating piece for error specialists. Collectors may also examine the coin for evidence of a double die. A genuine double die variety is created during the die-making process and can produce noticeable doubling on letters, numbers, or design elements. However, not every apparent doubling is valuable. Machine doubling, die deterioration, circulation damage, scratches, and other forms of distortion can easily be mistaken for a true double die, which is why authentication is essential before making extraordinary claims about value. Another intriguing possibility involves a die clash. A clash can occur when the obverse and reverse dies come together without a planchet between them, potentially transferring portions of one design onto the opposite die. If that damaged or altered die subsequently strikes coins, collectors may find unexpected design elements in places where they normally should not exist. A dramatic and authenticated clash on a 1993 P quarter could make the coin particularly interesting, especially if the characteristics are unusual and clearly connected to the minting process. There are also struck-through errors, which can happen when a foreign object or piece of material becomes trapped between the die and planchet during striking. This can leave missing details, unusual depressions, distorted areas, or strange shapes on the finished coin. Some struck-through errors are minor, while major examples can be visually dramatic and highly collectible. Another possibility that can create enormous interest is a wrong planchet strike. This occurs when a coin design is accidentally struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or an incorrect type of metal. A genuine 1993 P quarter struck on the wrong planchet could have unusual weight, dimensions, edge characteristics, or metallic composition, and these measurable differences could help specialists determine whether the coin is truly an error. However, unusual color or weight by itself does not prove a wrong planchet error, because environmental exposure, corrosion, chemical reactions, damage, or alteration can change a coin's appearance. That is why collectors should avoid making conclusions based solely on photographs or internet claims. A professional examination can be crucial when the potential value is extraordinary. Another area to inspect is the rim and edge. A malformed rim, missing portion, unusual broadening, partial collar strike, or other collar-related error may provide clues about what happened during the striking process. A partial collar error can sometimes create a distinctive appearance where part of the coin's edge or rim is improperly formed because the collar did not operate correctly during striking. Such errors can be especially interesting when they are dramatic, genuine, and preserved in excellent condition. Collectors may also look for die breaks, cuds, die chips, or other die-related abnormalities. A large die break can create a raised area of metal on the struck coin, sometimes producing an unusual shape or disrupting part of the design. A cud, for example, can occur when a portion of the die face breaks away, allowing the affected area of the coin to display an abnormal raised region. These characteristics can be collectible, but their value depends heavily on size, location, rarity, visual appeal, and authentication. The condition of the 1993 P quarter is another major factor. A coin that spent decades circulating through vending machines, cash registers, pockets, and bags can accumulate scratches, nicks, stains, and other marks, while a well-preserved example may retain stronger details and more attractive surfaces. If an extraordinary mint error were found on a coin with exceptional preservation, the combination could make it considerably more desirable than a similar error in poor condition. Professional grading can help establish condition, while authentication can help determine whether the unusual characteristics were created at the mint rather than afterward. This distinction is incredibly important because damaged coins can sometimes look spectacular but have little numismatic premium. For example, a coin that has been deliberately bent, carved, squeezed, chemically altered, drilled, polished, or otherwise manipulated should not be confused with a genuine mint error. If you think you have a potentially valuable 1993 P quarter, one of the worst things you can do is clean it aggressively. Cleaning can leave scratches or unnatural surfaces that reduce collector appeal and may complicate authentication. Instead, preserve the coin in its existing condition and seek professional guidance. The extraordinary $370 million figure connected with this story represents the kind of extreme possibility that gets collectors talking, but the important lesson is that a coin's value must be supported by evidence. A genuine auction record, recognized certification, documented provenance, exceptional rarity, and strong collector demand are far more meaningful than an unsupported online price claim. If an exceptionally rare 1993 P quarter with a previously unknown and dramatic mint error were ever authenticated, documented, and presented to the right audience of serious collectors, the competition could potentially become intense. Rare coins can attract collectors who are willing to pay significant premiums for pieces that fill an important gap in a collection, represent an unusual chapter in minting history, or possess an error that is rarely seen. Yet even then, no responsible collector should assume a specific enormous price without actual market evidence. The real excitement comes from discovering what makes a particular coin different. Imagine opening an old collection and finding a 1993 P quarter that looks slightly larger than normal, has an unusual rim, shows apparent doubling, weighs differently, or appears to have been struck dramatically off-center. Instead of immediately believing it is a fortune, you would begin investigating. You would compare it with normal 1993 P quarters, examine both sides under good lighting, inspect the edge, check the weight with an accurate scale, look closely at the date and mint mark, and research known varieties and errors. If the characteristics remain unexplained, professional authentication could be the next step. This careful process is what separates serious numismatic research from sensational speculation. The 1993 P quarter is especially interesting because it reminds us that even modern circulating coins can contain unusual manufacturing events that collectors find fascinating decades later. Every coin tells a story about the machinery, dies, metal, pressure, timing, and quality control procedures involved in its production. Most coins come out correctly, but the rare exceptions can become some of the most interesting objects in numismatics. So if you have 1993 P quarters sitting in a collection, old coin jar, inherited group, or box of loose change, take another look at them. Search for major off-center strikes, broad strikes, partial collars, genuine double dies, die clashes, struck through errors, die breaks, cuds, unusual. Next 1982 D $quarter coin. Today we are exploring the incredible legend surrounding the 1982 D Washington $quarter, a coin that in the most extraordinary and highly hypothetical scenario has been connected with an astonishing value of up to $365 million because of rare errors, unique characteristics, exceptional preservation, and the possibility of a one-of-a-kind discovery that could capture the attention of collectors around the world. Before we begin, it is important to understand that ordinary 1982 D quarters are common circulation coins, and a sensational value such as $365 million should be considered an extreme possibility rather than a normal market price, because true numismatic value depends on rarity, authentication, condition, collector demand, and documented evidence. The 1982 D quarter was struck at the Denver Mint and features the familiar portrait of George Washington on the front and the eagle design on the reverse, but what makes collectors excited is not the standard design itself, it is the chance that an unusual mistake occurred during the minting process. Coin production is a complex system involving planchets, dies, collars, feeding mechanisms, striking pressure, alignment, and inspection procedures, and when something unexpected happens at one of these stages, the result can be a fascinating mint error that transforms an ordinary coin into a highly collectible piece. One of the most dramatic possibilities is an off-center strike, where the blank planchet is not correctly aligned when struck by the dies. This can create a coin with missing design elements and a large blank section, making the error immediately noticeable. The greater the off-center strike while still showing enough of the date and mint mark to identify the coin, the more interesting it may become to collectors. Another possibility is a broad strike, which occurs when the retaining collar does not function properly during striking, allowing the metal to spread beyond its intended boundaries. A broad-struck quarter can appear wider than normal and may have an unusual shape that immediately attracts attention. Collectors also pay close attention to double dies, which are genuine die varieties created during the die manufacturing process. A true double die can show visible doubling on letters, numbers, or design details, although machine doubling, damage, and die deterioration can sometimes create misleading appearances. This is why specialists carefully examine coins under magnification and compare them with known varieties before determining authenticity. Another fascinating error is a die clash, which happens when the obverse and reverse dies strike one another without a planchet between them. This contact can leave traces of one design impressed onto the opposite die, and later coins struck from those dies may display unusual marks or ghost-like elements in unexpected places. Collectors often find die clashes especially interesting because they provide evidence of unusual events that happened inside the mint. There are also struck-through errors, where grease, debris, cloth fibers, or other foreign materials come between the die and planchet during striking. This can leave missing details, distorted areas, or unusual impressions on the coin. A dramatic struck-through error can make a coin look completely different from an ordinary quarter and can become highly collectible if properly authenticated. One of the most exciting possibilities involves a wrong planchet strike. Imagine a 1982 D quarter accidentally struck on a blank intended for another denomination or a different metallic composition. Such an error could create differences in weight, diameter, thickness, or color, making the coin stand out immediately. Wrong planchet errors are among the most intriguing mint mistakes because they represent an unusual combination of production errors, but collectors must always remember that strange color, altered surfaces, or damage do not automatically mean a coin is a genuine wrong planchet strike. Professional examination and accurate measurements are essential. Another possibility is a partial collar error, where the collar does not fully engage during striking, causing part of the rim or edge to form incorrectly. This can produce a distinctive appearance that experienced collectors recognize as evidence of a mint malfunction. Die breaks, cuds, and die chips are also important categories of errors. A die break occurs when part of the die develops a crack or damage, leaving raised lines or unusual shapes on the coin. A cud can appear when a piece of the die breaks away completely, creating a raised blob of metal on the struck coin. Large and dramatic cuds can attract considerable collector interest, especially if they affect major design elements. The condition of the coin also plays a critical role in determining desirability. A 1982 D quarter preserved in exceptional condition, with strong luster, minimal marks, and sharp details, may be far more appealing than a heavily circulated example, particularly if it also displays a significant mint error. This is why professional grading services are so important in the world of coin collecting. Grading establishes condition, while authentication confirms whether unusual features originated during the minting process or occurred later through damage, alteration, or environmental effects. A coin with scratches, chemical changes, filing marks, polishing, or other forms of post-mint damage may appear unusual but may have little numismatic value. If you believe you have an interesting 1982 quarter, one of the most important rules is never to clean it. Cleaning can permanently damage the surfaces and reduce collector appeal. Instead, preserve the coin carefully and compare it with standard examples. Weighing the coin, examining the edge, studying the date and mint mark, and researching known errors are useful steps before seeking professional advice. The extraordinary $365 million figure associated with this story should be viewed as a dramatic example of how collectors imagine the potential value of a truly unique discovery rather than a realistic expectation for ordinary coins. If a one-of-a-kind 1982 quarter with a previously unknown major error, exceptional preservation, historical importance, and strong documentation were ever found, it could attract intense competition among collectors. Rare coins often become valuable because they fill a missing place in important collections, represent unusual moments in mint history, or display spectacular mistakes that are seldom seen. This is the magic of numismatics. A small metal object created decades ago can become a source of excitement, research, and fascination. Imagine searching through old rolls of quarters, inherited collections, forgotten jars, or boxes of coins and discovering a 1982 quarter that appears different from every other example. Perhaps it has unusual weight, dramatic doubling, an off-center strike, a strange rim, or evidence of a major die error. Instead of immediately believing it is worth millions, a careful collector would investigate, compare, measure, document, and seek expert authentication. This process is what separates serious coin collecting from speculation. The 1982 quarter reminds us that every coin has a story, and sometimes the smallest details can reveal something extraordinary. Most coins are ordinary, but a few become remarkable because of errors, rarity, and collector demand. That possibility keeps collectors searching and learning. So check your quarters carefully, look for genuine mint errors, protect any unusual discoveries, and remember that knowledge is one of the most valuable tools in coin collecting. Here at the Numis Explorer, we celebrate the excitement of uncovering hidden treasures and understanding the history behind American coins. If you enjoy rare coin stories, valuable error discoveries, and the thrill of searching for something extraordinary in everyday change, stay connected with the channel, share your discoveries, and continue exploring, because the next fascinating coin might already be waiting in your collection, ready to reveal a story that has remained hidden for decades. Next, 1986 quarter dollar coin. Today we are taking a deep look at the 1986 Washington quarter dollar and the incredible possibility of a spectacular error coin attracting an extraordinary valuation, with the sensational figure of $360 million representing an extreme hypothetical scenario rather than the normal value of a standard 1986 quarter. If you have ever looked through an old jar of coins, a family collection, a box of change, or a handful of quarters and wondered whether one small piece could be worth far more than its face value, this is exactly the kind of story that makes coin collecting so exciting, because the real mystery is not simply the year printed on the coin or the D mint mark from Denver, but what happened to that particular coin during the manufacturing process. Most 1986 quarters are ordinary coins and should not be expected to be worth millions, but an exceptionally rare, properly authenticated mint error can sometimes transform an otherwise familiar coin into a highly interesting collectible. The reason is simple: every coin begins as part of a carefully controlled manufacturing system, and that system involves blank planchets, dies, collars, striking pressure, alignment, feeding mechanisms, and quality control procedures. When everything works correctly, millions of nearly identical coins are produced, but when something goes wrong at exactly the right moment, a small number of unusual coins can escape the mint and survive for decades. Those mistakes are what error collectors search for, and the 1986 quarter provides an interesting opportunity to discuss the kinds of characteristics that could make a particular example much more desirable than a normal circulated coin. One of the first things to examine is the possibility of an off-center strike. An off-center strike happens when the planchet is not positioned correctly between the dies when the striking process takes place. Instead of receiving the design perfectly centered, the coin can show a large blank area on one side, while portions of the Washington portrait, lettering, date, or reverse design may be pushed toward the opposite edge. A dramatic off-center error can be visually striking, especially when enough of the date and mint mark remain visible to identify the coin. The amount of off-centering, the overall condition, the strength of the strike, and whether the error is genuine all influence collector interest. A minor shift may have limited premium value, while an exceptionally dramatic and authenticated example can be much more interesting. Another possibility is a broad strike, an error associated with the collar that normally helps control the shape and diameter of the coin during striking. If the collar fails to properly contain the planchet, the metal can spread outward, creating a quarter that looks unusually broad or flattened. The edge and rim can provide important clues, and collectors often compare the suspected error with a normal coin of the same type. A genuine broad strike is different from a coin that simply became damaged after leaving the mint, so careful examination is essential. Another area that can attract attention is doubling. Collectors often hear the phrase double die, but it is important to understand that not every coin showing apparent doubling is a genuine double die. A true double die variety originates during the preparation of the die and can produce distinctive separation or secondary images on letters, numbers, or design details. Machine doubling can create a different appearance and is generally not considered the same type of error. Damage, scratches, die deterioration, and other forms of distortion can also create misleading shapes. This is why a serious collector should never decide that a 1986 D quarter is a rare double die simply because a photograph seems to show extra lettering. The exact characteristics must be studied, compared, and, when appropriate, authenticated by professionals. Another fascinating possibility is a die clash. During the striking process, the obverse and reverse dies are supposed to meet a planchet between them. If the dies come together without a planchet, portions of one design can potentially transfer onto the opposite die. When that die later strikes coins, unusual traces can appear in unexpected locations. A dramatic clash can make a coin especially interesting because it provides evidence of a specific malfunction within the minting process. Collectors may carefully examine areas around Washington's portrait, lettering, the eagle design, and other portions of the coin for unexpected raised or ink-use details that do not belong there. Another possible error is a struck-through coin. This happens when some foreign material becomes trapped between the die and the planchet during striking. The result can be an area where design details are missing, flattened, distorted, or replaced by an unusual depression. The appearance can vary greatly depending on the material involved and the exact circumstances of the strike. A minor grease-filled die effect may be relatively subtle, while a dramatic struck-through error can be visually impressive. Again, the key question is whether the feature was created at the mint or happened afterward. A damaged coin can sometimes look extremely strange, but that does not automatically make it valuable. One of the most exciting possibilities for any error collector is a wrong planchet strike. This occurs when a coin design is struck onto a planchet intended for another denomination or another type of coin. If a 1986 D Washington quarter were genuinely struck on an incorrect planchet, specialists could potentially notice differences in weight, thickness, diameter, edge appearance, or composition. Such a discovery would require careful testing and professional authentication because unusual color or weight can have many explanations unrelated to a mint error. Environmental exposure, corrosion, chemical reactions, alteration, and damage can all change the appearance of a coin. A genuine wrong planchet error must be supported by evidence. The rim and edge are also worth examining. Some minting mistakes involving the collar can create unusual edge shapes, including partial collar errors. A partial collar occurs when the collar does not properly surround the planchet during the strike, potentially creating a distinctive stepped or misshapen edge. To an inexperienced observer, such a coin might simply look damaged, but experienced error collectors know that the edge can provide valuable evidence about what happened during the strike. The important thing is to determine whether the unusual shape is consistent with a known mint error rather than a post-mint alteration. Another possibility involves die breaks, die chips, and cuds. Dies are hardened tools, but they are not indestructible, and repeated striking can eventually produce cracks, chips, or breaks. A die chip may leave a raised area on the finished coin, while a more significant die break can produce a larger raised line or irregular feature. If a section of the die face breaks away, the resulting coin can display a large raised area known as a cud. The size, location, progression, and rarity of such an error can affect its desirability. A dramatic cud that interrupts an important part of the design can be much more interesting than a tiny die chip that is difficult to see without magnification. Collectors may also look for unusual planchet problems, including incomplete planchets, clipped planchets, laminations, and other manufacturing abnormalities. A clipped planchet can occur when a blank is improperly punched from the metal strip, leaving a characteristic curved or straight missing section. The appearance of the clip, the presence of other diagnostic features, and the overall shape can help specialists determine whether it is genuine. A coin with a legitimate planchet error can become an interesting addition to an error collection, particularly if the error is dramatic and well preserved. Lamination-related problems can also create unusual surfaces where layers of metal separate or peel due to problems in the planchet. Such features should be distinguished from damage caused by corrosion or harsh environmental conditions. Another factor that can make an unusual 1986 D quarter interesting is its condition. Imagine two coins with the same rare error, but one has been heavily circulated for decades while the other has sharp details, strong surfaces, attractive luster, and minimal contact marks. Collectors will often consider the better preserved example more desirable. Condition can have a major impact on market interest, particularly when an error is already scarce. This is why collectors should resist the temptation to clean a potentially valuable coin. Polishing, rubbing, chemical treatment, or aggressive cleaning can permanently change the surface and potentially destroy evidence that specialists need to examine. If you find a suspicious 1986 D quarter, the safest approach is generally to leave it in its original condition and handle it carefully. The sensational $360 million figure makes for an exciting treasure hunting story, but responsible collectors need to understand the difference between a hypothetical maximum scenario and an established market value. A normal 1986 D quarter is not a $360 million coin. A specific coin would need extraordinary characteristics and compelling evidence before any exceptional valuation could even be discussed seriously. The most important question is always what makes that individual coin different. Is the error unquestionably mint-made? Next, 1978 $quarter coin. Today we are taking a very close look at the 1978 Washington $quarter and the incredible idea that an exceptionally rare example with extraordinary mint errors could potentially attract an astonishing value of up to $355 million in an extreme hypothetical scenario. Before we go any further, it is important to understand that an ordinary 1978 quarter is not automatically worth millions, and a sensational figure such as $355 million should never be treated as the normal value of every coin from that year. The real excitement comes from the possibility of a unique specimen with a dramatic, genuine, authenticated mint error, extraordinary condition, unusual provenance, or a combination of characteristics that could make it exceptionally desirable to serious collectors. The 1978 Washington quarter is an interesting piece of American coinage because it was produced during a period when enormous numbers of quarters were being manufactured for everyday commerce, and whenever millions of coins are produced, there is always the possibility that a small number of unusual pieces can escape normal inspection. Most coins are struck correctly, but the rare exceptions can become fascinating collectibles because they preserve evidence of something going wrong during the manufacturing process. A coin begins its journey long before it reaches your pocket, and the process involves metal strip, blank planchets, preparation of dies, feeding systems, collars, striking pressure, alignment, inspection, counting, and distribution. Every part of this process has to work correctly for a perfectly normal coin to emerge. When one component fails, shifts, breaks, or interacts with another component unexpectedly, the result can sometimes be an error that makes one coin look dramatically different from millions of others. That is why collectors examine old quarters so carefully. One of the first possibilities to consider when examining a 1978 quarter is an off-center strike. An off-center strike occurs when the blank planchet is not positioned correctly between the dies at the moment of striking. Instead of the design appearing perfectly centered, part of the coin can remain blank while the design is pushed toward one side. A dramatic off-center strike can be especially interesting if the date remains visible, because the date helps identify the coin and makes the error easier to attribute. The percentage of off-centering, the visual impact, the amount of design remaining, and the condition of the coin can all influence collector interest. A tiny shift may not be especially dramatic, but a major off-center strike that leaves a substantial blank area can become a much more fascinating error. Another possibility is a broad strike. The collar normally helps control the shape and diameter of the coin while it is being struck, but if the collar is missing or does not function correctly, the metal may spread outward. The result can be a quarter that looks unusually broad, flattened, or expanded compared with a normal example. The edge can provide important clues, because a genuine broad strike has characteristics associated with the striking process rather than damage that happened later. Collectors may also examine the rim for unusual formation, missing portions, or other abnormalities that could indicate a collar-related problem. Another highly discussed possibility is doubling, but this is an area where collectors need to be especially careful. A genuine double die is created during the die-making process and can show distinctive doubling on lettering, numbers, or design details. However, many coins that appear doubled are actually examples of machine doubling, die deterioration, damage, scratches, or other forms of distortion. Therefore, simply seeing what looks like a second image does not prove that a coin is a valuable double die. A genuine variety must be evaluated based on the specific characteristics of the doubling, and professional authentication can be extremely important when a potentially valuable coin is involved. If a 1978 quarter showed a dramatic and authenticated double die characteristic, particularly one that was extremely scarce and visually obvious, collectors could potentially find it much more interesting than a normal example. Another fascinating possibility involves die clashes. During normal production, the obverse and reverse dies strike the planchet between them, but if the dies come together without a planchet in place, portions of their designs can potentially transfer onto the opposing die. Later coins struck from those dies may display unexpected design elements or unusual impressions in areas where they do not normally belong. A dramatic clash can provide evidence of a specific event inside the mint and can become an interesting collectible for specialists. When examining a suspected clash, collectors should compare the coin with a normal 1978 quarter and carefully study both sides for shapes, lines, or design remnants that appear inconsistent with the standard design. Another possible mint error is a struck-through error. This can occur when foreign material becomes trapped between the die and planchet during striking. Depending on the material and circumstances, the resulting coin may show missing details, flattened areas, unusual depressions, or distorted portions of the design. A struck-through error can be minor or dramatic, and its desirability depends on the visibility, rarity, location, and authenticity of the feature. A coin with a major struck-through error can be fascinating because it records a moment when something interfered with the normal striking process. However, collectors must distinguish a true struck-through error from damage that occurred after the coin left the mint. A scratch, gouge, dent, or chemical alteration can create an unusual appearance, but that does not make the coin a mint error. One of the most exciting possibilities is a wrong planchet strike. Imagine a 1978 quarter design accidentally being struck on a blank intended for another denomination or an incorrect planchet. Such a coin could potentially show differences in weight, diameter, thickness, edge characteristics, or composition. A genuine wrong planchet error can be particularly interesting because it represents a major production mistake rather than simply a minor defect. But again, this type of discovery requires serious examination. Unusual color alone does not prove a different metal, and unusual weight can result from damage, corrosion, alteration, or measurement problems. Specialists may examine the physical dimensions and composition before determining whether a wrong planchet claim is legitimate. Another possibility is a partial collar error, which can occur when the collar does not properly surround the planchet during striking. The resulting coin may have a distinctive edge or rim appearance, sometimes appearing stepped, distorted, or improperly formed. To an inexperienced collector, this can look like damage, but an experienced numismatist may recognize characteristics associated with a genuine striking error. The edge of a suspected error coin should therefore never be ignored. Turning the quarter sideways and examining its edge can reveal important information that is not visible from the front or back. Die breaks, die chips, and cuds are also worth discussing when examining a potentially valuable 1978 quarter. Dies are extremely strong, but they can develop cracks, chips, or breaks through repeated use. A die chip may create a raised area on the coin, while a larger break can leave a prominent raised line or irregular shape. When a portion of the die face breaks away, the resulting coin can display a larger raised area known as a cud. Large and dramatic die breaks or cuds can attract collectors because they can be visually obvious and can document a particular stage in the life of a damaged die. The location and size of the feature matter, and a large cut affecting an important part of the design may be much more interesting than a tiny die chip that is barely visible. Another category involves clipped planchets and other planchet errors. A clipped planchet occurs when the blank is improperly punched from the metal strip, leaving a missing curved or straight section. Genuine clips can show diagnostic characteristics that help distinguish them from coins that were cut or damaged after minting. If a 1978 quarter has a large, unusual missing section that appears to have been created before striking, it could be worth investigating. Other planchet abnormalities may include laminations or flaws in the metal that become visible during or after striking. These can create peeling, splitting, or irregular surfaces, but collectors must be careful because corrosion and environmental damage can sometimes produce similar appearances. Condition is another critical factor when considering the potential value of an error coin. A 1978 quarter that has circulated for decades may contain scratches, dents, contact marks, stains, and other signs of everyday use. A rare error in poor condition can still be collectible, but an equally rare error preserved with strong details, attractive surfaces, and minimal damage can be considerably more desirable. This is one reason professional grading can matter so much. A reputable grading service can assess the condition of a coin and, when appropriate, identify and authenticate an error. Certification does not magically make an ordinary coin valuable, but it can provide important evidence when a coin has characteristics that require expert evaluation. If you discover a 1978 next 1981 p $quarter coin. Today we are taking a deep look at the 1981 p Washington $quarter and the sensational possibility of an exceptionally rare example being associated with an extraordinary value of up to $350 million because of dramatic errors, unusual mistakes, extreme rarity, exceptional preservation, or a combination of characteristics that could make one individual coin extraordinarily desirable to collectors. Before we begin this exciting search, there is one important point every collector should understand: an ordinary 1981 p $quarter is not automatically worth millions, and a figure such as $350 million represents an extreme hypothetical scenario rather than a normal market value. The real question is what could make one specific 1981 p $quarter dramatically different from the countless ordinary examples that were produced. That is where mint errors, planchet mistakes, die abnormalities, striking problems, unusual varieties, condition, authentication, provenance, and collector demand enter the story. The 1981 p $quarter was produced at the Philadelphia Mint and carries the P Mint mark, and like other coins made during a large-scale production era, it passed through a complicated process before entering circulation. Metal was prepared into strips, blanks were punched from those strips, planchets were processed, dies were prepared with the intended designs, and powerful presses brought the dies together under tremendous pressure to create the finished coin. The process was highly controlled, but no manufacturing system is perfect, and occasional mistakes can occur. Most mistakes are caught by quality control or never create a collectible feature, but a small number of unusual coins can escape into circulation. Those survivors are what make error collecting so exciting. Imagine finding a 1981 quarter that looks almost normal at first glance, but when you inspect it carefully, the design appears dramatically shifted, part of the rim is missing, the lettering looks doubled, the edge has an unusual shape, or the coin weighs differently from a normal quarter. That first observation could lead to an investigation into whether the unusual characteristic was created at the mint or happened later through damage. One of the most dramatic possibilities is an off-center strike. An off-center strike happens when the planchet is not properly positioned between the dies when the coin is struck. Instead of the Washington portrait and reverse design appearing centered within the normal boundaries, the design can be pushed toward one side, leaving a blank portion of the planchet exposed. A major off-center strike can be visually spectacular and may attract collector attention, especially if the date and mint mark remain visible enough to identify the coin. The degree of off-centering matters, because a tiny shift may be less interesting than a dramatic strike where a significant part of the design is missing. Authentication is also essential because a coin can be bent, damaged, or mechanically altered after leaving the mint and may then look off-center even though it was originally struck normally. Another possibility is a broad strike, a striking error connected with the collar that normally surrounds the planchet and helps control its diameter and shape. If the collar fails to function correctly, the metal can spread outward when the dies strike the planchet. The resulting coin may appear unusually wide or flattened compared with a normal 1981 quarter. The edge and rim can provide important clues, and experienced collectors often examine these areas carefully before concluding that a coin is a genuine broadstrike. A dramatic broadstrike can be highly interesting, particularly if it retains strong design detail and has not suffered significant damage after leaving the mint. Another major possibility collectors might investigate is a double die. A true double die is created during the preparation of a die and can result in distinctive doubling on portions of the design. Collectors may examine the date, lettering, and other design elements for signs of genuine separation or secondary impressions. But this is also one of the easiest areas for inexperienced collectors to misunderstand. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, dents, and post-mint damage can create appearances that resemble doubling. A photograph taken at the wrong angle can also make ordinary details look unusual. Therefore, a 1981 quarter should not be called a rare double die simply because a collector sees what looks like extra lettering. Genuine double die characteristics must be studied carefully and compared with reliable references, and professional authentication may be necessary when the potential value is substantial. Another fascinating possibility involves die clashes. During normal production, the obverse and reverse dies strike a planchet between them. If the dies accidentally come together without a planchet, parts of one design can potentially transfer onto the opposing die. When coins are later struck from that damaged die, collectors may see unexpected shapes or design elements in locations where they do not belong. A dramatic clash can be particularly interesting because it documents a specific mechanical event inside the mint. If a 1981 quarter appears to show strange raised or incuse elements that resemble portions of the opposite design, the coin may deserve closer examination. Another type of error is the struck-through coin. During striking, a foreign object or material can sometimes come between the die and planchet, leaving an area where the design is missing, distorted, flattened, or unusually depressed. The exact appearance depends on what material interfered with the strike and how it interacted with the die. Some struck-through errors are subtle, while others can be extremely obvious. Collectors value dramatic examples more highly when the error is genuine and clearly visible. However, post-mint damage can produce similar depressions, so the origin of the feature must be established before making a major value claim. One of the most exciting possibilities in error collecting is a wrong planchet strike. A wrong planchet error occurs when a coin design is accidentally struck on a blank intended for a different denomination, composition, or type of coin. If a 1981 quarter were discovered on an incorrect planchet, specialists could potentially identify differences in weight, diameter, thickness, edge characteristics, and composition. Such a coin could be fascinating because it represents a major breakdown in the normal production process. But unusual color or unusual weight by itself is not enough to establish a wrong planchet error. Environmental exposure, corrosion, chemical reactions, plating, damage, or inaccurate scales can all create misleading evidence. A serious investigation would require precise measurements and, where appropriate, professional testing. The edge of the coin can be just as important as the front and back. Collectors sometimes overlook the edge, but it can reveal evidence of collar-related errors, abnormal planchet characteristics, or other manufacturing problems. A partial collar error, for example, can occur when the collar does not properly surround the planchet during the strike. The resulting coin may have an unusual stepped or distorted edge, and the appearance can be very different from ordinary damage. If you have a 1981 P quarter that seems strangely shaped around the rim, examine the edge carefully and compare it with a normal quarter. Another possibility is a die break, die chip, or cud. Mint dies strike thousands or millions of coins and can experience wear and mechanical stress. A small piece of the die can chip away, creating a raised area on the coin. A crack can produce a raised line or irregular feature. If a larger portion of the die breaks away, the resulting coin may show a prominent raised area known as a cud. The size, location, and progression of such an error can make it interesting to specialists. A large and dramatic cut affecting an important portion of the design may attract more attention than a tiny die chip that requires magnification to see. Another category involves planchet errors. A blank may sometimes be clipped, incomplete, improperly formed, or affected by a problem in the metal. A genuine clipped planchet can show a curved or straight missing portion, and certain characteristics can help determine whether the clip occurred during the manufacturing process rather than through later cutting or damage. Lamination-related problems can also create unusual surfaces when layers within the metal separate. These can be collectible when genuine, although corrosion and environmental deterioration can sometimes produce similar appearances. The challenge for the collector is always to determine the cause. The fact that a coin looks strange is only the beginning of the investigation. Condition is another factor that can dramatically influence the desirability of an unusual coin. A 1981 P quarter that has been circulating for decades may show scratches, dents, stains, and contact marks, while an example preserved in exceptional condition may retain sharp details, attractive surfaces, and stronger original appearance. If two coins have the same genuine error, the better preserved example may receive significantly more attention. This is why collectors should never clean a potentially valuable coin. Cleaning, polishing, rubbing, or applying chemicals can permanently alter the surfaces and potentially remove evidence of the original. Next, 1977 D $quarter coin. Today we are taking a detailed journey into the 1977 D Washington $quarter and the incredible possibility of an exceptionally rare example attracting an extraordinary valuation of up to $345 million because of dramatic errors, unusual mistakes, extreme rarity, exceptional preservation, and intense collector interest. Before we begin this exciting search, remember that an ordinary 1977 D quarter is not automatically worth millions, and a sensational figure such as $345 million should be understood as an extreme hypothetical scenario rather than the normal market value of a standard coin. The real question is what could make one specific 1977 D quarter dramatically different from ordinary examples, and that is where genuine mint errors, unusual planchet problems, die varieties, striking mistakes, condition, authentication, provenance, and collector demand become important. The 1977 D quarter was produced at the Denver Mint during an era when huge numbers of Washington quarters were manufactured for everyday commerce, and whenever millions of coins are made, there is always the possibility that a small number of unusual pieces could escape normal inspection. Most coins leave the mint correctly struck and eventually circulate for years, but the rare exceptions can preserve evidence of something unexpected happening during production. That is exactly what makes error collecting so exciting. A coin begins its journey as metal that is processed into the proper form, followed by blanking, planchet preparation, die preparation, feeding, striking, inspection, counting, and distribution. Every stage must work correctly for a normal quarter to emerge. If a planchet is incorrectly positioned, a die develops damage, the collar fails, foreign material interferes with a strike, or another mechanical problem occurs, the finished coin can contain a permanent record of that event. One of the most dramatic possibilities for a 1977 D quarter is an off-center strike. This occurs when the blank planchet is not properly aligned between the obverse and reverse dies when the striking pressure is applied. Instead of the Washington portrait and reverse eagle appearing in their expected positions, part of the design may be pushed toward one side, leaving a noticeably blank section around the opposite edge. A major off-center strike can be visually spectacular, particularly when the date and D mint mark remain visible enough to identify the coin. The percentage of off-centering can influence desirability, but the most important factors include authenticity, visual impact, condition, and how rare the particular error is. A coin that merely appears crooked because it was bent or damaged after leaving the mint is not the same as a genuine off-center strike. This is why professional examination is important. Another possibility is a broad strike, an error associated with the collar that normally surrounds the planchet during striking. If the collar does not properly contain the planchet, the metal can spread outward when the dies strike it, creating a quarter that appears wider, flatter, or differently shaped than a normal example. The edge and rim can provide important clues, because a genuine broad strike will show characteristics consistent with a failure of the collar during the actual strike rather than damage that occurred later. A dramatic broad strike on a 1977 D quarter could attract collector interest, especially if the design remains sharp and the surfaces are well preserved. Another area collectors may investigate is doubling. A genuine double die is created during the die-making process and can show distinctive doubling on lettering, numbers, or other design elements. Collectors might carefully inspect the date, lettering, and major design details for clear evidence of separation or secondary impressions. But this is also an area where misinformation can spread quickly, because many apparent examples of doubling are actually machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, dents, or post-mint damage. A genuine double die must have specific characteristics that distinguish it from these other effects. Therefore, seeing what looks like an extra line on the date does not automatically mean the quarter is a rare double die. A serious collector should compare the coin with known examples and seek professional authentication if the characteristics appear significant. Another fascinating possibility is a die clash. During normal production, the obverse and reverse dies are supposed to strike a planchet between them. If the dies accidentally come together without a planchet in place, parts of one design can potentially transfer onto the opposite die. Later coins struck by that die may show unexpected shapes or impressions in areas where those details normally do not exist. A dramatic die clash can be highly interesting because it provides evidence of an actual mechanical event inside the mint. If a 1977 D quarter shows unusual raised or incuse elements that appear connected to the opposite side's design, collectors may want to investigate further. Another potential error is a struck-through coin. During the striking process, foreign material can sometimes become trapped between the die and the planchet. When the press strikes the coin, the material can interfere with the transfer of the design and create missing details, flattened sections, unusual depressions, or distorted areas. Depending on the object involved, the result can range from subtle to extremely dramatic. A major authenticated struck-through error can be interesting to collectors because it represents a specific moment when something interfered with the normal production process. However, a post-mint scratch, gouge, dent, or chemical alteration can sometimes look similar, so determining the origin of the feature is essential. One of the most exciting possibilities is a wrong planchet strike. A wrong planchet error occurs when a coin design is accidentally struck on a blank intended for another denomination, composition, or type of coin. If a 1977 D quarter were found on an incorrect planchet, specialists might examine its weight, diameter, thickness, edge, and composition to determine what happened. A genuine wrong planchet error can be exceptionally interesting because it represents a significant failure in the normal production system. But unusual color alone is not proof of a wrong planchet, and a coin with unusual weight may have been damaged, corroded, altered, or measured inaccurately. A proper investigation would require reliable measurements and, where appropriate, professional testing. The edge of the quarter can also reveal important information. Collectors sometimes focus entirely on the obverse and reverse, but the edge can provide clues about collar problems, planchet abnormalities, and striking errors. A partial collar error, for example, can happen when the collar does not properly surround the planchet during the strike. The resulting coin may have an unusual stepped or distorted edge, and the rim can appear different from a normal quarter. Such a piece may look damaged to an inexperienced observer, but experienced error specialists know that certain edge characteristics can indicate a genuine mint error. This is why a suspicious coin should be examined from every angle. Die breaks, die chips, and cuds are additional possibilities that can make a 1977 D quarter unusual. Dies are designed to withstand repeated striking, but they can eventually develop cracks, chips, and breaks. A small die chip may create a raised blob or irregular area on the coin, while a crack can produce a raised line. If a significant portion of the die face breaks away, the resulting coin may show a large raised area known as a cud. The size, position, shape, and rarity of the feature can influence collector interest. A dramatic cut affecting a major portion of the design may be more desirable than a tiny die chip that is barely visible. Another category involves planchet errors. A clipped planchet can occur when a blank is improperly punched from the metal strip, leaving a missing curved or straight section. Genuine clips often display diagnostic characteristics that help distinguish them from coins that were cut or damaged after minting. A 1977 D quarter with a significant and properly authenticated clip could become an interesting error collectible. Other planchet problems can involve incomplete blanks, metal flaws, or lamination-like abnormalities. These conditions can produce unusual surfaces or missing areas, but collectors must distinguish genuine planchet problems from corrosion, environmental damage, or later manipulation. Condition can dramatically affect the desirability of an unusual 1977 D quarter. A coin that circulated for decades may have scratches, dents, stains, and contact marks, while an example preserved in excellent condition may retain sharper details and more attractive surfaces. If two coins have the same genuine error, the better preserved coin may attract more attention from collectors. This is one reason cleaning is such a bad idea when dealing with a potentially valuable coin. Polishing, rubbing, abrasive materials, or chemicals can permanently change the surface and may remove evidence needed for professional examination. If you discover an unusual 1977 D quarter, preserve it in its existing condition rather than attempting to make it look brighter or newer. The sensational $345 million next 1966 $quarter coin. Today we are taking a fascinating journey into the mystery surrounding the 1966 $quarter, a coin that has attracted enormous attention from collectors because of the unusual errors, striking mistakes, condition possibilities, and rare combinations that can make a seemingly ordinary quarter dramatically more interesting and potentially far more valuable than its face value. And while you may hear sensational claims online suggesting that a particular 1966 quarter could be worth as much as $340 million, it is extremely important to understand that such a figure should be treated as a hypothetical or promotional claim rather than a normal established market value, because genuine market prices depend on authentication, rarity, condition, provenance, auction demand, and the exact nature of any error, but that does not make the 1966 quarter uninteresting. In fact, this date provides an excellent opportunity to learn why mint errors can transform ordinary coins into remarkable numismatic discoveries. So before you spend another quarter from your pocket, your old collection, a family coin jar, or a forgotten box of change, take a closer look, because the smallest details can sometimes tell a much bigger story, and the first thing that makes the 1966 quarter especially interesting is its place in American coinage history, with the United States Mint producing enormous numbers of quarters during an era when coins were being manufactured at high volume and under demanding production conditions, meaning that although most examples were struck correctly, the possibility of production abnormalities always existed, and when collectors search these coins today, they are not simply looking for an old date, they are looking for evidence that something unusual happened during the manufacturing process, and that is where the excitement begins. Because a true mint error is fundamentally different from ordinary damage that happens after a coin leaves the mint, and understanding that difference is one of the most important skills any collector can develop. So imagine finding a 1966 quarter with an unusually broad appearance, strange lettering, missing design details, an off-center strike, doubling, unusual metal characteristics, or another feature that appears inconsistent with normal production. Your first reaction might be that you have discovered a fortune. But the smart collector does not immediately assume a huge value, instead they investigate. Compare the coin with verified examples, examine the surfaces carefully, and determine whether the unusual feature was actually created at the mint, because a genuine mint-made error can be collectible while damage caused by machines, tools, chemicals, heat, bending, grinding, polishing, or other environmental factors generally does not create the same premium. And one of the most exciting possibilities collectors look for is an off-center strike, which happens when a coin blank is not positioned correctly between the dies at the moment of striking, potentially leaving part of the design missing and producing an obvious area of blank metal. And the degree of the off-center strike matters because a dramatic and clearly identifiable error can be more desirable than a barely noticeable shift, especially when important design elements remain visible and the error can be confidently attributed to the minting process. But again, not every unusual-looking 1966 quarter is automatically rare or extremely valuable, and authentication becomes critical, because modern marketplaces contain many damaged coins that are mistakenly advertised as valuable errors, and this is exactly why serious collectors learn to distinguish genuine mint errors from post-mint damage. Another possibility that can attract attention is a doubled design, particularly when letters, numbers, or other elements show genuine separation created during the die making or striking process, although collectors must be careful because machine doubling and other forms of strike-related distortion can look similar to true double dies, and the distinction can significantly affect desirability. So if you believe your 1966 quarter shows doubling, do not simply rely on a casual photograph or an online claim. Study the coin under appropriate magnification and compare its characteristics with documented examples, because tiny differences in the shape and direction of the apparent doubling can tell an entirely different story. And another possibility is a broad strike, where the collar that normally helps contain the coin during striking is absent or malfunctioning, potentially allowing the metal to spread outward beyond the expected dimensions, creating a larger-looking or unusually shaped coin. And a genuine broad strike can be an interesting mint error, particularly when other details support the conclusion that the abnormal shape occurred during striking rather than afterward, while another category collectors may investigate is a clipped planchet, where part of the metal blank is missing because of an abnormality during the preparation or cutting of the planchets, sometimes creating a distinctive curved or straight-edged missing section, and genuine clipped planchets can display characteristics that help separate them from coins damaged after leaving the mint, making careful examination essential. And then there are wrong planchet possibilities, which can be especially fascinating because a coin may be struck on a blank intended for a different denomination or composition, potentially producing unusual weight, diameter, thickness, color, or design relationships, but claims involving wrong planchets require especially careful testing and professional authentication because weight alone is not enough to prove a wrong planchet error, and collectors should never damage a coin by cutting, drilling, scratching, filing, heating, or otherwise testing it themselves. Because destructive testing can permanently reduce its value and destroy evidence, while another possibility involves die clashes, where dies come together without a planchet between them and transfer elements of one design into the opposing die, potentially leaving unusual traces on later coins struck with that die. And genuine die clashes can be fascinating because they provide evidence of a specific event in the production process, but once again, the exact appearance matters, and online photographs can easily lead inexperienced collectors to mistake ordinary die characteristics, scratches, or contact marks for a dramatic error, and this brings us to another major factor in the potential value of a 1966 quarter: condition, because even a genuine error can have very different values depending on how well the coin has survived, and a coin with strong original surfaces, sharp details, attractive luster, minimal marks, and excellent overall preservation can be much more desirable than a heavily worn example, especially when the error itself is dramatic and easy to verify, so collectors should resist the temptation to clean an old coin in an attempt to make it look newer, because cleaning can leave scratches, unnatural surfaces, or chemical discoloration that professional graders can recognize, potentially reducing the coin's desirability. And this is one of the most important lessons in coin collecting. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a potentially valuable coin is simply leave it alone, protect it from further damage, and have it properly examined, because the story of a rare coin is not just about age, it is about rarity, authenticity, condition, historical significance, and collector demand. And the 1966 quarter is particularly useful as an example because it demonstrates how a common date can become interesting when an unusual production characteristic is discovered, and this is why collectors frequently inspect rolls, inherited collections, estate lots, old jars, dealer inventories, and circulated change, hoping to discover an overlooked variety or error, and although most searches will produce ordinary coins, the possibility of finding something unusual is what makes the hobby exciting, and if you are examining a 1966 quarter right now, begin with the date and minting characteristics, then inspect the lettering, numbers, rim, edge, portrait, reverse design, and overall shape, checking for abnormalities that appear integrated into the metal rather than marks sitting on top of the surface. Then compare the weight and dimensions with reliable specifications, but remember that ordinary wear, corrosion, environmental exposure, and damage can change the appearance and sometimes even affect measurements, so no single observation should be considered proof by itself, and if something truly unusual appears, preserve the coin in a suitable holder and consider submitting it to a reputable professional grading and authentication service, because certification can provide an independent assessment and can make a major difference when a coin is being offered to serious collectors. And now we come back to that astonishing $340 million figure, because this is where sensational coin stories can become misleading, and a responsible collector should understand the difference between a headline claim and an established sale price, since a coin does not automatically become worth hundreds of millions of dollars simply because someone online assigns that number to it, and there is no guarantee that any ordinary 1966 quarter has such a value, but the enormous figure can still serve as an attention-grabbing way to introduce the larger lesson. Extraordinary mint errors can sometimes command substantial premiums, and truly exceptional coins with documented rarity, historical importance, remarkable errors, outstanding condition, and strong provenance can attract intense competition, particularly when multiple serious collectors want the same piece. And the most valuable lesson is therefore not to assume that every 1966 quarter is a jackpot, but to learn what makes a coin genuinely exceptional, because once you understand mint errors, varieties, planchets, dies, striking pressure, condition, grading, and authentication, you become much better equipped to recognize legitimate opportunities and avoid last 1993 D quarter dollar coin. Today we are taking a close look at the 1993 D quarter dollar, a coin that may appear completely ordinary at first glance but becomes much more fascinating when you begin examining the possibilities of mint errors, striking abnormalities, unusual planchets, die varieties, condition, and other characteristics that collectors search for. And you may have heard sensational claims suggesting that an extraordinary 1993 D quarter could be worth as much as $335 million because of errors and mistakes. But before we get carried away by that enormous number, it is important to understand that such a figure should be treated as a hypothetical or sensational claim rather than a normal established market value for a 1993 D quarter, because genuine coin values depend on authentication, rarity, condition, demand, provenance, and the exact nature of the error. Yet the possibility of discovering an unusual example is still what makes coin hunting so exciting, because sometimes the most interesting coins are not necessarily the oldest coins, and a modern-looking quarter can still contain a manufacturing mistake that collectors find fascinating. So if you have a 1993 D quarter in your collection, an old coin jar, a family box, a bank roll, or even sitting among everyday change, this is the perfect opportunity to take a closer look, because the first rule of successful coin hunting is simple. Never assume that a familiar coin is automatically ordinary, and never assume that a strange looking coin is automatically valuable either. Instead, learn how to investigate what you are seeing, and that is especially important when searching for errors because genuine mint errors are created during the manufacturing process, while damage that happens after a coin leaves the mint generally does not carry the same numismatic significance. And the 1993 D quarter is an excellent example for understanding this difference, because collectors may examine the coin for evidence of an off-center strike, broad strike, clipped planchet, die clash, doubling, unusual die deterioration, strike through, wrong planchet possibility, missing or weak design elements, unusual rim formation, or other abnormalities that could potentially make an individual example more interesting than a normal coin. And one of the first things you should inspect is the overall alignment of the design, because an off-center strike can occur when a planchet is not positioned correctly between the dies during striking, leaving part of the design missing and creating a noticeable area of blank metal, and the degree of the displacement matters because a dramatic and clearly visible off-center strike can be more desirable than a tiny shift that is barely noticeable, especially when the date and mint mark remain visible and the error can be confirmed as a genuine mint-made mistake. But this is also where inexperienced collectors can become confused, because a coin can appear off-center simply because of damage, bending, impact, or other post-mint activity, so the shape and characteristics of the metal must be examined carefully, and if the unusual appearance looks suspicious, professional authentication is always safer than making assumptions based on a photograph. And another possibility that attracts collectors is a broad strike, which occurs when a coin is struck without the normal collar properly containing the planchet, allowing the metal to spread outward beyond its expected diameter, potentially creating an unusual shape while preserving parts of the design. And a genuine broad strike can be an interesting mint error, particularly when the characteristics are consistent with a striking event rather than damage. But again, the exact evidence matters, because a quarter that has been flattened, squeezed, or damaged after leaving the mint is not the same thing as a genuine broad strike. And this distinction between mint-made errors and post-mint damage is one of the most important lessons for anyone hoping to find a valuable coin, because online marketplaces often contain dramatic claims about ordinary damaged coins, and collectors who learn to identify genuine errors are much more likely to recognize a legitimate discovery. And another area worth investigating is the possibility of a clipped planchet, where a portion of the metal blank is missing because of an abnormality during the planchet cutting process, sometimes leaving a curved indentation along the edge of the coin. And genuine clips can show specific characteristics that help establish their origin, but collectors should avoid automatically calling every curved or missing section a clip, because coins can be damaged after minting in ways that produce similar shapes, and this is why careful comparison and expert examination are so important. And then there is the fascinating possibility of a wrong planchet error, which can occur when a coin is struck on a blank intended for another denomination or type of coin, potentially producing unusual characteristics in weight, diameter, thickness, color, or overall appearance. And a wrong planchet quarter would be especially interesting because the physical characteristics of the blank could provide evidence that something went wrong during production. But this kind of claim should never be based only on color, because lighting, environmental exposure, toning, corrosion, and surface treatments can change the appearance of a coin. While accurate measurements and professional analysis can provide much stronger evidence, and collectors should never cut, drill, file, scratch, bend, heat, or otherwise alter a suspected error coin in an attempt to prove what it is, because destructive testing can permanently damage the piece and destroy information that could have helped establish its authenticity. And another major area of interest is doubling, because collectors often search dates, lettering, mint marks, and design elements for signs that a die or striking process produced a doubled image, but not every apparent doubling is a valuable doubled die, and mechanical or machine doubling can create flattened or shelf-like secondary images that may look exciting to an inexperienced collector but are fundamentally different from a recognized doubled die variety. So if you discover unusual doubling on a 1993 D quarter, take the time to compare the exact shape and placement of the apparent doubling with reliable references and known examples rather than immediately assuming that you have found a fortune. And the same principle applies to unusual lettering, strange shapes, die scratches, raised lines, and other features that appear on coins, because some characteristics are normal parts of die wear or production while others may indicate something genuinely unusual. And this is why magnification can be useful. allowing collectors to inspect tiny details around the date, mint mark, lettering, portrait, eagle, rim, and other design elements, but magnification should be used as a tool for observation rather than as proof of value, because a coin's market importance ultimately depends on the combination of characteristics, authenticity, rarity, and collector demand, and condition is another major factor that cannot be ignored. Because two coins with the same date and basic type can have dramatically different desirability depending on preservation, and a high-grade 1993 D quarter with strong details, attractive original surfaces, good luster, minimal contact marks, and excellent overall eye appeal may be considerably more desirable than a heavily circulated example, especially if the coin also possesses a genuine and dramatic error, and this is why collectors should never clean a potentially valuable coin, because cleaning can leave hairline scratches, unnatural surfaces, discoloration, or other evidence that can reduce its desirability, and even if a coin looks dull, dirty, or unattractive. Preserving its original surfaces is generally much safer than trying to make it shine, and if you think your 1993 D quarter has something unusual, place it in an appropriate protective holder, avoid touching the surfaces unnecessarily, document its weight and appearance without damaging it, and consider obtaining an opinion from a reputable numismatic professional or established grading and authentication service, because independent verification can make a major difference when determining whether an unusual feature is genuinely a mint error. And now let us talk about the famous $335 million claim, because this is where responsible collecting requires a little skepticism, and while a headline saying that a 1993 D quarter could be worth $335 million sounds unbelievable and is certainly attention-grabbing, collectors should not interpret that as meaning that normal examples of this date are worth anything close to that amount, because extraordinary prices require extraordinary evidence, and there is no automatic mechanism that turns a regular quarter into a multi-million-dollar coin simply because someone describes it as an error, and real-world values are established through evidence and market activity, including authenticated rarity, recognized varieties or errors, condition, auction results, dealer assessments, collector competition, and provenance. And if a truly exceptional coin were ever discovered, the market would need to evaluate exactly what makes that specific specimen extraordinary, and this is why the more useful lesson behind the enormous claim is to understand how rarity and mistakes can influence value rather than simply memorizing a huge number, because a dramatic mint error can make an otherwise common coin much more collectible, and a combination of unusual characteristics can potentially make a particular specimen even more interesting, especially if those characteristics are genuine, rare, and clearly documented. And imagine, for example, finding a 1993 D quarter with a significant off-center strike where a large portion of the design is displaced but the date and mint mark remain identifiable, or discovering a quarter with a confirmed wrong planchet error and unusual measurements that clearly distinguish it from normal examples, or locating a dramatic broadstrike with unmistakable mint-made characteristics, or finding a legitimate clipped planchet with the